Today is the feast of Christ the King. It is the end of the liturgical year in the church that celebrates kingship of Christ. Now, the thought of king often has these human connotations. We think of king either as splendor, majesty, and power, and too often it also conjures up human images of negative power. There's negative overtones. There is oppression and corruption. But to celebrate this feast, we have to rethink our image of kingship in order to really understand the point of this feast. We have to put aside all of the visuals of kingship that we see or that we remember in history. Because the feast of Christ the King is not a celebration of the authority of any human institution, including the church, including any kind of royal power in the world. The feast of Christ the King is about the authority of God. The point of the gospel today in the feast of Christ the King is that it reminds us that we belong to God, and that God has power in our lives, even in times when we feel helpless and vulnerable and in great suffering. The gospel reminds us that nothing can take us away from God's love and power in us and over us and through us in our lives. God has a claim on us in love. The mystery about this feast is that the kingship of Christ comes at the cost of the cross. It's through the way of the cross. In this gospel, from the Gospel of John, Jesus is standing before Pilate and also before the cross, bearing witness to the truth. Pilate accuses him, "So you are then a king?" And Jesus replies, "It is you who say I am a king. The reason I was born, the reason why I came into the world, is to testify to the truth. Anyone committed to the truth hears my voice." The image of Christ as King is not one of power, but one of suffering and vulnerability. And it is one of a way of a cross. As I said earlier, this feast marks the end of the liturgical year in the church calendar with this image of Christ as King. This King on trial for his life, standing before a cross. Now, this Sunday is also a pivotal point because the following Sunday we begin a new liturgical year, a season of Advent, which means coming. Get ready because Christ is coming, and we celebrate that coming at Christmas in the image of Christ as a child, an infant child, the incarnation of God, the Word that becomes flesh and dwells among us, comes to us as this vulnerable baby. So this Sunday we're at this image of King, and we move to a season to welcome a vulnerable baby. The wood of the manger becomes the wood of the cross, and this royalty of God comes at a great price. So just for a moment, imagine differently an image of a royal king. The jeweled crown would be a crown of thorns. The staff would be the wood of the cross. The subjects would be disciples of equals. The rule is mercy, justice, peace, compassion, and love. The vision of this royalty is truth, and the promise of this royalty is the fidelity of God, even in suffering. Again, Jesus replied to Pilate and says to us, here and now in this week. The reason I was born, the reason why I came into the world is to testify to the truth. Anyone committed to the truth hears my voice. The voice of truth is that God is with us, always with us. Amen.